Gurubhyo Namaha. Om Aim Saraswatyai Namaha. Om Gajananam Bhutaganaadisevitam Kapittajambo Palasara Bhakshitam Umasudam Shoka Vinashakaranam Namami Vigneshwara Pada Pankajam Shadananam Kunkumaraktavarnam Mahamadim Divyamayura Vahanam Rudrasisum Surasainanatham Guham Sadaham Sharanam Prapadye Ya Kundandu Tusharahala Dhavala Ya Shubhra Vastra Vrada Ya Vima Varadanda Mandidakara Ya Shveta Padmasana Ya Brahma Chitta Shankara Prabhati Deva Sada Pujita Samam Patu Saraswati Bhagavati Nishesha Jadhyapaya Om Namah Shivaya Gurave Satchidanandamurte Nishprampajaya Shanta Shri Shivanandaya Te Namaha Shri Shivanandaya Te Namaha Om Sarvamangalamangalaye Shive Savartha Sadhike Sharanye Tremaki Gauri Narayani Namostate Narayani Namostate Om Shanti 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 Om Peace 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 Bol Sadguru Shivan Maharaj Ki Jai Bol Shri Vishnudevan Maharaj Ki Jai Om Namah Shivaya, good evening. I welcome you to our second talk on how to cultivate non-attachment. So we will primarily discuss this subject from the spiritual perspective, although there will be some points that can be also applied to our relationships. Since the relationships are a much larger kind of subject in some ways and with many branches, we may leave that for another time, but let us see some basic, again, definitions of non-attachments and what we need to do in order to live happier life. So non-attachment from the spiritual perspective means and arises as it is, in fact, the effect of the perception of the impermanence of all things. Now, this is a hard kind of nut to swallow in a sense, or crack, because we tend to think that even though there are a lot of things that are changing, there are some things that are more permanent, even though they will also change. But it is this idea that some things, especially things that we are attached to, that we love, are something that will hopefully last longer. We do not get attached to things that will last a shorter period of time. Suppose somebody tells you, I'd like to be with you, but only for 3 months, you will say, no, that's not going to work. Or let's say you buy a car and somebody, whoever is selling you the car, says the car will be lasting, will be only good for about, 3 months. Nobody wants only a certain percentage of happiness that arises from our interaction with objects. And so even when we're shopping, we're looking for more durable things. And of course, there's another reason behind it, and we're not going to go into it, but certainly all things change and all things are impermanent. This includes our own body and our mind. Then, so the first, I would say, definition of non-attachment is based on the fact that it is the effect of the perception of the impermanence. The second would be that is the result, or it is the fact of the recognition of the falsity of the idea that happiness comes from something outside of us. So, in a way, to believe that happiness exists in objects as such, or people, or circumstances, or the happiness will arise at some point as the result of the right, combination of factors, which we still haven't got to, but somehow, hopefully, they will come to us. So all that together, and the last thing, which is the non-attachment, is the result of the knowledge of the distinction between what we call the real and the unreal, or between the reality, which is the true reality, which is our consciousness and awareness, or the divine in us, and that which is an appearance. Now, an appearance, of course, me and you are also in appearances because we represent a certain form or a certain name, which are changing all the time, moment by moment. And therefore, all the things, even if they have a certain solidity about them, in fact, are nothing but appearances. what really is the only reality is that which allows us to perceive something that is changing. Obviously, that in itself has to be changeless, and that which allows us to see the appearances as appearances, it must be, by definition, constant and real. So that is our true self. So we start with a little heavy kind of a definition of non-attachment, but it is important. Now, to elaborate further, we have to remember that non-attachment does not necessarily come as a result of some kind of a painful experience. Now, let's say some people have had an injury, or they lost somebody, or they had a divorce, or something like that. Such non-attachment, if it arises, of course, is generally conditional, and it doesn't last for a long time. So let's say if due to some kind of a illness, we decide that we will not eat junk food anymore, we will go to sleep on time, we start exercising, and all these things. Of course, that is all wonderful, but it is in no way a guarantee that we're going to pursue such a change and make it permanent in our life. In some people's lives, that's the case, but in some people's lives, that's truly not the case. So we may go back to eating the same food, doing the same things as before. Now, when we get better naturally. So when we go to a funeral, for example, we also have some kind of a reflective moment. We think, okay, that person died. Maybe they didn't, lead a life in a way that we should be ourselves leading. So naturally, we start to reflect about life, and we also reflect about our own vulnerability, right? Our body also one day will get sick and will go. So that all reflection can lead us into, again, wanting to improve our life, and that's wonderful. Will we be able to sustain this? This is a question of many factors, and one of them is that experience strong enough to initiate the change that is needed? Often, this is the only way that people change is through pain or through suffering. When the suffering becomes intolerable, then we are ready to make some changes, but often such changes and such discipline may come more out of fear than out of true discrimination. So this is how it is. Maya operates all the time, and one of the ways that Maya manifests is in creating this condition of forgetfulness. We have burnt our fingers many times in many different situations, but then as soon we recover from it, we're already back to doing the same thing, so we forget. That's how Maya works. In fact, what you find with most people is after they've been through a difficult or painful experience, they end up being exactly where were before, um, where they were before, maybe slightly changed, but usually almost the same. For example, you know, many people return in some ways to the same condition they had before, such as a painful experience. It could be, let's say, an abusive relationship, some kind of a condition like this, again, where they just don't care about their bodies or their minds or whatever. They don't practice yoga, nothing. Okay, so obviously, a negative experience does not necessarily create, although it can initiate it, of course, a state of detachment that is necessary to let go of certain negative habits or negative conditioning or simply of a state of dependence. That's what we're aiming at. So the true non-attachment is not born of a negative experience, it's rather born from a powerful, profound discrimination, which obviously is the result of some kind of a training. And once you have established the discriminative power, what the next thing is needed is to sustain the discipline in a particular direction, let's say eating or exercising or meditating or whatever that may be, until it becomes permanent. So non-attachment, again, is born not out of mere failure in life or some kind of a painful experience in life. Now, there are many beautiful definitions of non-attachments given in the scriptures, and one that I like a lot is that Swami Shivananda says desirelessness, which is another name for non-attachment, is born of the love for the eternal. Of course, we call this in Sanskrit vairagyam or vairagya. Now, how does this more profound level of non-attachment arise in life? This would be very useful to bring up because I think it will connect you to some kind of a memory in your moments of reflection that you had and that you still have at times. So sometimes we become aware that everything is slipping out of hands, and it's not so much that that experience is necessarily painful, but it is just not, we're not able to find a lasting happiness in this world. So when we are contemplating the transitory or perishable nature of things and objects and people and all these things, that creates a sort of a disgust, if I may say, in the minds, and naturally in every mind, in proportion to the depth and the subtlety of their mind and their experience. So there comes an irresistible feeling and recognition, and hopefully you've all experienced that to some degree, that the finite can never satisfy the infinite in us. And so that the changing and perishable can never really satisfy or fulfill the changeless and deathless nature of ours, which is we call Atman. Okay, so when we continue to think like this, even in the midst of the bustle of life, with so many problems and everything, there come moments of some tranquility. And when the mind, for a few moments, start to really, expands its wings and it soars about this duality, these problems and things, and starts to reflect on higher problems of life, you know, same questions. Who am I? How is this that I was born? What will happen when I die? All these questions, in fact, lead and fructify into a state of non-attachment. So when that happens with the aspirants, then the process can become quite deep and serious, and then we will deepen or extend our reflection to the point that this true discrimination is born, and we are ready to move much higher in the evolution of our lives. So, another definition of an attachment, I like many definitions of non-attachments, and they're all useful for our contemplation. Non-attachment means to not desire that which we have through the razor power of our discrimination. Just please think that at some moments in your life you do have profound discrimination. The only problem is whether you're able to act on it, whether their emotions, obviously they're connected with attachment, that are holding you down from allowing yourself to follow the dictates of your higher self or your profound discrimination. So back to the idea, non-attachment again means to not desire that which we have found through, profound discrimination, which we have found to be unreal, right? So that means that we become profoundly aware that all things are subject to change, and that eventually we must learn to let go of everything. And we should begin by learning to let go of our basic emotional responses in a day and not take them completely as real. For example, I can say, there's an irritation in the mind, and I would not use the sentence, I'm irritated, because when I say I'm irritated, I make that experience much more exaggerated in my mind and much more real for that sake. when I say this emotion is in my mind, the irritability is in my mind, I take a little distance away from it and I'm able to actually see it in a way that I see externally objects. So it's something that comes and goes. Obviously, it's ignited by something, and if I let my discrimination or if I buy time, if I may say that way, for a few moments to just not like identify with that, we'll find that gradually irritation will subside and we can come back to our true self. So we can practice with every single emotion like this. Naturally, there will be more difficult, more profound temptations to resist than just a simple irritation, but this is the path to it. So non-attachment is the state of wisdom, really, in which we have also learned to outgrow our desires. So we have to touch on desires because there isn't such a subject as attachment without desires or non-attachment as conquest of desires. Taking into account that we all have numerous desires that we have come into this life with, we're going to first have to learn to discriminate between the sattvic and non-sattvic desires, and to understand that the tamasic and rajasic desires, their pull is always towards slavery, and whereas the sattvic desires, even though there's still some form of desires for spiritual life, for being a kind person and other things, they're necessary. So we cannot all of a sudden let go of all desires. That will not be possible, but gradually we will. So these days, desires are the primary causes of attachments. And every desire arises from 5 causes, or at least we could say one, but they're all interconnected. One, when there's an absence of ananda or bliss, then desire manifests in the mind. For example, when you're in a blissful state, either you're having some Starbucks coffee or something, I'm not going to go any further than that. You're having some good news, you're having a good friendship, you're having a good experience of some kind. And let's say of deep sleep also, you have no desire. When you're enjoying something, when you're truly satisfied after you enjoyed it, you have no desire for a little while. So when the absence of bliss arises, then the mind again gets agitated and it's looking for a same object or similar object. So it's actually looking for the similar experience, and that is the experience of bliss. So the second condition, the second reason, these are all interconnected. A desire arises due to the sense of limitation. When we feel limited in the body and the mind, in a particular experience, or we feel some kind of restlessness, that limitation can be analyzed in different ways. Then by searching for an object of pleasure, we're trying to overcome the limitation, because after we have fulfilled, let's say, a pleasure or desire, we feel temporarily limitless. And then when we shrink back into this kind of a mind and a body, then we again need another experience or same desire, whatever it is. So the sense of the absence of bliss, the sense of limitation, the sense of incompleteness, which again, we regain the completeness by the fulfillment of desire. And the last two are the sense of imperfection. So what we're gaining when we fulfill a desire is the sense of perfection, even though it's faulty, yeah, because all these things don't last. We have to look for it in the right direction. Nevertheless, the last one, the last reason why desire manifests is a sense of some lacking, of some kind of a lacking that we have in life. When we lack something, we try to fulfill that in any way we like. In fact, it is considered that desire, from a point of view of that perfection, is a denial of perfection. Why? Because our true nature is already perfect. So often when I teach this kind of a subject, I think of a story of a little, not story, but just an incident, let's say, of a girl who had a plastic ring. So let's say you're the girl or you're the boy that had something like that you played with when you were little. And when you got it, you got very attached to it. Now, if somebody was to take that away from you and perhaps throw it away, you would be screaming, fighting, God knows what, to protect your little plastic ring. And your parents and everybody else knows that there isn't really a value to the plastic ring since it's made of plastic, but to you, you've set a certain value on it, which is higher than what a normal person would see. So that goes into our idea, what we talked about last time, how we set a high value on something, and that creates immediately a condition for attachment. So, of course, 20 years later, you are given now a diamond ring. Now, even before getting the diamond ring, what happened in the meantime? In the meantime, gradually, as you matured, you started to depend less on that plastic ring for your experience of happiness, and you started to let go of it gradually. So we can say you managed to outgrow your desire for a plastic ring, in simple words. Now, of course, you got a diamond ring, and you're going to develop attachment for the diamond ring. But anyway, from the point of view of the diamond ring, you're quite detached in regards to the plastic ring, and you're very objective. So whether anything was to take place to the plastic ring, it would not really bother you much. So non-attachment is like that. It's an outgrowing of certain limitations because you have to think of desires as limitations. The next thing is what we need to be clear on is that non-attachment doesn't mean not having or having. It makes no difference whether you have something or don't have something. A person who lives in a little cottage in India or in Africa someplace, and if they have only one cow, if you ask them what will make you complete, what will make you happy, he says just another cow. 2 cows will be enough. You give them a second cow, you think they will be happy for a little while. Then they will say, oh, we need a third cow. So the quantification aspect here, in terms of your happiness and attachment, makes no difference. You can have less things and be attached to them, and you can have only one thing and be very attached to it, or you can have millions of things and not be attached to any of them. So what it is that non-attachment is not about not having, but it is more about letting go of or eliminating the projection of such ideas that I cannot live without these things, or I cannot exist happily if these things change and something happens to them. So non-attachment in this case would mean the absence of psychological dependence on others, on objects, or anything like this for happiness, for our happiness. You have to think about this, that we really come here, let's say like children and babies, we're very free, right? And gradually, as we get more, when we get older, we become, boys and girls, and we go become men and women and all that. We realize that our freedom has been robbed somehow. By what? Our Atmic pearl has been snatched away by what? By our senses, by our mind. It's not the objects that are the problem. The problem is the senses and the mind that remain uncontrolled. And so that means that our freedom has been lost due to many of these things. And of course, desires are there too, cravings, longings, and all that. So what the consequence is then is that we find ourselves in a kind of perpetually restless state, in turmoil, and when we do not have a control of our mind and our senses, we will find that we easily get attached to things, and we'll find that we become unhappy. Now, for a few moments, I'm going to take a view of the some negative aspects of attachment. And let's say, as Swami Shivananda will call it, disadvantages of attachment. First of all, the very idea of attachment is based on two things. One, on the sense of I and mine, which we're going to see in a minute. And as long as you don't call something mine, as long as your own self has not been somehow extended into that particular thing or object or what it is, that it has become you, you're okay. The moment you think this is mine, this is me, then you're attached. And then when we look at the other aspects, attachment is based on exaggeration. You see, we only get attached to something when there is some an excessive notion of thing, which is a quality of that person or that thing, and that excessive notion is in proportion in our need to be happy. So the more we need somebody or something to be happy, the greater the excessive or the more excessive notion or superimposition is about that person or about certain quality they have or object or condition, or it doesn't matter what it is, right? So uh, we could say that attachment is based on exaggeration of certain qualities. It is a form of infatuation because it is difficult to control the magnetic pull of something that we value as very precious for our own happiness. And also, we become infatuated with these kind of qualities, and which we exaggerate. Now, often attachment to something or for somebody is a masked self-love. In fact, we really love ourselves in that person because when we love the person with attachment, we have certain unspoken conditions most of the time that they're part of this process of loving or being attached to somebody. So if that person doesn't follow a certain, expectations of ours and hopes, and then we become disillusioned and our conditions change, and so also our love for the person change, either diminishes or we find somebody else. Then another interesting thing about attachment is that it causes us to, first of all, have excessive thoughts about that object or person we attach to. Therefore, there are worries, there's a fear of losing that what we attach to, there's an anger if something stands in the way of us experiencing the pleasure from that object or that person. So it's quite complex emotional and psychological um, condition of the attachment itself. So all of these things are necessary to contemplate about because you do, if you want to be free from non-attachments, you have to increase your contemplative ability and your ability to really discriminate deeply. Here are some practical things you can do in order to kind of overcome the tendency, at least, to becoming attached to something new. And then you can practice that also with the objects that are already existent in your life. Swami Shivananda says that the most powerful meditation is to think nothing belongs to me. I am only a temporary shareholder. I have something in my ownership only for a little while, and that thing will be with me and then it's going to be gone. So if you meditate like this on every experience, every person you meet, everything you have, including your money and your wealth and everything, nothing belongs to me, that will give you a tremendous mental strength and you will be able to feel really, really peaceful. Then, for a few moments every day, you can think either before a particular pleasure comes or something like that. A vairagi, or person who is committed to this, will be thinking about every single experience like this. And that will be this pleasure that is about to come and I'm about to have is bound to last only for a certain amount, moments, of minutes, perhaps days, whatever. When and how, as long as my senses and my pranas and my bodies are in good shape and strong, I can have this experience. However, this experience of pleasure is going to leave something behind. The pleasure doesn't just come and it ends. Then you could be free like that, but the pleasure is its very nature is that, first of all, it creates an impression in the mind, the subconscious mind, like a little stamp, right? But which is also alive. So that impression will only increase the already pre-existing predisposition to this particular type of experience, so that I would want to repeat it. I want to have it again. And this will create a greater attachment, and it will create a craving. When we think of a craving, we think it's like, okay, it's not a big deal. But craving is an incredible sense of restlessness that affects the person. So these impressions will follow me into the life after death, in fact, and also will follow me into the next lifetime. So this is the nature of every pleasure, and you contemplate like that. And it will help if you also, in addition to it, you read some books on Vairagya. For example, the books such as Bhatrihari's. There's a very famous king who wrote 100 verses on Vairagya. And there's, in the Yoga Vasishta, there's a there's a phenomenal chapter on the nature of non-attachment, which is good. Any book by Swami Shivananda will also be very helpful here. So the point is this, that you have to learn to step away from simply getting lost in the objects. For that purpose, we need to cultivate a state of mind which is kind of semi-introvert. So as we are mixing with different objects and things, we're continuously aware how the impressions of these objects and people impinges onto our consciousness, and so that we have some kind of a ability to step away from it and not be completely consumed by something that we are perceiving, listening, and so on. So what we need to do is to practice awakening, right? To awaken ourselves from a daydreaming. So every time our attention gets arrested by some kind of an object or desire, out of curiosity, for example, remember that our little pearl of freedom gets snatched away. And then I have to do some self-analysis, right? I can ask myself, was I unconscious? What was the reason I was unconscious to not notice how this object and this person has affected me? And I was moving through the day thinking that I'm free, and then I realized at the end of my day that there were many moments when I was not free. So this could be difficult. For example, many people think that they're free, but think about when they move through the day. Let's say a person who is attached to something like alcohol or sugar or whatever it is, sex, are they really free when they walk? So this is an important question for us. And the question that we need to answer is, does every desire fulfilled lead to attachment? So I'll leave that, of course, to you. Now, we need to look at life a little bit like a music. The events in life are like the notes of the music and the music bars. And as long as you hold onto any kind of a note, you say, this one is really pretty, I like this one very much, you will be missing the beauty of the whole beauty of the music. So we need to kind of let it come and let it go. This is the practice. And I like something like how would I say? I call it principle of in the middle, right? Because an attachment is a phenomena that develops in a very strange way. Here's an example, and it probably took place literally in my life. Let's say I see a guitar, and the guitar doesn't belong to me. It's very beautiful. It sounds great. Everything about this is just right. Right, one of those perfect guitars. Now, as long as this guitar doesn't belong to me, I have a certain distance from it. I'm able to be objective. I'm able to understand if the guitar is going to have some problem, if there is too much of a humidity or too little of it, the neck may warp, all these things, I think, like that. So what happens is that because of this objectivity and this little distance that I keep, I'm able to also appreciate and evaluate this guitar in a way that, it's completely, I would say, normal, right? There's an appreciation of beauty. You don't need to deny it in life, whether it's a guitar or a person or whatever. But you have to make sure that it doesn't go into a state of fascination. Okay. So anyway, let's say now, up to this point, there were no headaches. But I decided to buy a guitar. It's $1,000 thing. Great. Now, what happens is then, now I seem to appreciate this guitar even more, right? But only because, in fact, I'm more attached now. So I wouldn't call this the right type of appreciation. It would be an excessive appreciation. So if somebody was to do something to this guitar, I would be very upset. So of course, whatever takes place to this guitar on a day-to-day basis can bring me some pleasure, and often it can bring me also some headaches. So the headaches came now. They were not there in the beginning. Okay, one day I decided to sell the guitar. Perfect. So what happens is, again, the headaches are gone. You see, what happened is that before the guitar belonged to me, there wasn't a sense of me and I invested in that object. It was simply the guitar as it is. Now I bought the guitar. Now, for some mysterious reasons, it seems that the sense of the I and mind has been simply transferred onto, or we could say, I have invested the guitar with the sense of I and mind. So what happens is that whatever happens to the guitar happens to me, right? And now it's mine. So if you do something to it, I will be upset. Then what happens after I sold it? After I sold it, the sense of the I and mine has been simply mysteriously again withdrawn. Well, if this sense of the self can be like that, transferred onto and taken away, where does it abide? What is the true nature of it? Right? So we realize that this whole idea of ownership is a fiction, and all things in this life are non-personal. But for whatever reason, we seem to be adding some kind of values, and that seems to keep us alive, right? So we see that is a mistake we make. Similarly, when people fall in love with somebody, before they fell in love with somebody, they were completely normal. Once they fell in love with somebody, they lost their mind. And once they kind of separated the person, they all became again normal. Now, I'm simplifying this. I'm not saying love is bad or anything is bad. But the all ownership, the reality of it is an illusion. So this is an important thing. As the a wonderful master, Swami Ramatirtha, said something one time. He says, you cannot no longer enjoy a thing when you become attached to it. This is the problem. Everything we have a capacity to enjoy, and it's completely natural, it's completely sattvic. But that capacity is destroyed by owning it. You can enjoy a flower in the garden without having to pick it up. You can enjoy the beauty of a man or woman on the street without needing to possess them. You can appreciate the beauty of nature, of the lakes and the mountains without having to take the lake or a mountain home or take a picture of it by your camera in order to appreciate it. You see, so these are all interesting things. So again, the Swamiji said something about the gardener. He says, A disinterested nature lover, when he comes to a garden, he can enjoy a garden. Whereas the very person who takes care of the garden, so-called the master of the garden, his flowering property, is nothing, is no more than a perpetual source of care and anxiety. So this is what attachment does to all of us. Now, this practice of non-attachment will lead us gradually to the realization that all processes in nature and creation are non-personal, right? But that doesn't mean that there is no love there, there's no care there. All processes are mutually dependent, and they're based on a sort of self-care or self-sacrifice and what I would call the laws of dharma, and so that it brings the experience of the true or pure love that is the foundation of this creation. Now, to become a vairagi, a person of this discrimination, you can do this with the help of some satsang. You can do it in a way that you appreciate even your own experiences, even your painful experiences, even your mistakes, because a person who is non-attached has been matured by life, by their own experiences, and they're not easily swayed anymore by the emotions. They're basically, I would say, a spiritual aspirant is who is aiming to develop a healthy non-attachment, is committed to eradicating these erroneous notions or fictions about, our relationship in general with this life, right? So then this whole point of ownership will disappear, and to just finish in the healthy condition in relationships requires that we maintain a certain distance also, a healthy distance, to not uh, try to impose a control over somebody or something, but is to rather appreciate the uniqueness of the person you're with, or object that you possess, and in a sense also to keep a little bit of a distance. It's like to fast a little bit from being continuously in a single relationship consumed by the person, so you can lose the capacity to appreciate that person as she or he is. That will help you also develop a little bit of a non-attachment, which is a healthy condition and a condiment for true love. So with these words, I finish here with this second subject, and thank you so much for being such wonderful students. I'm sure there's a lot more to be said, but hopefully in another webinar in some future. Thank you. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamadachite Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Bol Sadguru Shivan Maharaj ki jai, Bol Shri Vishnudevan Maharaj ki jai.